Overall, I'm very pleased with the way the eye is developing so far, especially given how crucial it is to a believable portrait. However, with each new render test we've done, something has just been feeling a little bit off. And it's the amount of sclera we see below the iris, the amount of white we see in between the iris and the lower eyelid. So if we look at our reference, we never see this much white. The best examples are this picture in the middle and this picture up top, where we see sclera on the upper side of the eye here and on the lower side here, but both of them feel kind of wired, like the eyes are wide open. And that's not the feeling I want. I want something more casual. And every other photo reference shows the bottom eyelid basically touching the lower edge of the iris. And so I need to rotate the bottom eyelid up so that it's touching our character's iris. And then I mentioned it before, the fact that the eye meniscus reflections are kind of displaced from the transition of eyelid to sclera. In other words, these reflections should be sitting right on that transition. And so while I'm making the tweak to the lower eyelid, I'll also try to tighten those reflections and remove that displacement. And so initially I was bummed about this change because we have a lot happening in the eyes. Basically, I need to move up the eyelid itself. Let's turn on overlays. So that means vertices in the head object. That means vertices in the eyelashes and the eye meniscus on both sides. So that's kind of a complex change to make. However, we can tab into edit mode on all those objects at the same time and rotate them in one motion. So that's what I'm going to do, but first I need to center our pivot point according to one eye. So with that selected, I'll hit Shift S, snap cursor to selected, and I'll be able to use this pivot point for both eyelids. And now for the selection, we want eye meniscus object, we want the eyelashes, the head, and then meniscus and eyelashes on the other side. Tabbing into edit mode, we can see all of them are available. However, on our head mesh, we have the eye closed shape key active. So I need to tab back to object mode, select our head, go to our shape keys, and I might as well create a new shape key for this. The only thing is the other objects will not have the shape key, but at least the head mesh will, and I could possibly dial down the amount of rotation. So let's change the value to 1 and call it eyelid fix. And now go through the selection again, shift select the eye meniscus, the lashes on both sides, tab into edit mode, and really all I want on both sides is the apex of the curve. All right, so go to wireframe mode. I'm just talking about this right here. Back to solid view. This apex set of edge loops, when combined with proportional editing, will allow us to pull the whole eyelid up cleanly. So with that selected, I want to make sure I don't have any extraneous verts selected. All right, we'll do the same thing to the other side. Apex of the curve, and then deselect anything behind it. The selection is important, so take your time. You don't want to mess up any verts in the back. And then let's enable proportional editing and just do a test rotation. RX with the cursor at the 3D pivot, or rather with the pivot at the 3D cursor. Scroll my mouse wheel to increase the influence. Okay, so I don't like the fall off there. The center was being pulled up more than the rest of the eyelid. So let's try the spherical fall off, RX. Okay, I do like that fall off a little bit better. However, it's taking too much of the eyelid with it. I don't like that. Okay, so basically I want to hide the geometry that I don't want affected. So I will deselect everything and then select these verts on the lower eyelid on both sides. I don't want these to be pulled up pretty much at all because the rotation around the eye ends up bringing this kind of out and up. And so with those selected, let's hit H to hide. Let's see, I accidentally selected a wrong vert. Okay, H to hide those. And one more time, we'll select the central verts, the apex of the lower eyelid curve on both sides. Okay, let's try this again. RX. All right, I like our fall off. Now I have tested this and I know that a rotational value of about 7 or 8. -7 or 8 is going to be good. Let's go with -8, which might seem really squinted at first. I mean, honestly, it would help if we switch to material preview. It might take a moment to compile the subsurface shaders, but at least we can get an idea of where the iris starts. So let's undo that. So that's before. It's confusing because it looks like the lower eyelid is kind of touching the iris. But remember, this is misleading because it's the meniscus, the top edge of the meniscus object. So we really do want it to be rotated up significantly. Now the base of the eyelid is touching the iris, or at least should be closer. All right, so with that, we'll tab back to object mode and make sure everything's working fine. It looks like our shrink wrap meniscus is still good. We're not seeing any intersections. And yeah, I think we should be good for a render test. So I'll switch to slot 7 and render this. Okay, let's see the full resolution. Alt-J, this is before and after. So yeah. Yes, that feels much more natural. Good grief. It was pulled down so low originally, now that we have the improved version. So yeah, I think that looks a lot better. The only other slight issue after that change is I feel like this shape is not smooth enough. Right here, there's a kink in the eyelid curve. So I need to kind of pull this upward on both sides. Probably due to the fall off not being perfect. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and then definitely we can see the displacement on the meniscus now. So I'm still going to make that change. We'll switch to slot 8, or actually I'll do that in a little bit, because when I go back to our UI, I'll use this as reference for making the change. So tabbing back into edit mode, it should be simple. You can kind of see it here, the curve kink. All right, so I need to be able to pick a good set of verts. Let's use circle select here. Deselect what's behind it. I'll probably just make these changes separately on each side. It's really confusing with these the EV versions of these materials just being reflective and not refractive. I wonder if I can turn that on. I'm feeling kind of lazy to turn that on. It's not an easy process. Let's see. I'm just going to try to eyeball it with a smooth fall off this time. Yeah, I just want to pull it up a little bit. Something like that. It is a danger to do it kind of lazy like this, but I'm going to try and get away with it. All right, let's do the other side. Again, very important to deselect what you don't want to move. There we go. I think that's going to be good. But probably the best test is to select our head and go to local view. And yeah, that does feel like a smoother curve overall. Okay, so let's do a render in slot 8. Okay, let's take a look. Alt-J, this is before. Yes. Whew, I got lucky with that risk. The little kink in the curve, I think, feels a lot better. Okay, we are seeing a little bit of an artifact in the meniscus object. So this is what I was talking about. I don't think we ever saw this before, but for some reason, a transparent material, whenever it intersects, we get this black artifact. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure out why this happens. But this is why I like to hover the meniscus just off the surface to avoid this, which is good because I want to adjust the meniscus anyway. Remember, I want to tighten the reflections into this transition from eyelid to sclera. And while I'm at it, I'll fix that artifact. And so we'll go back to our user interface, leave local view. And yeah, we're definitely experiencing some intersection here. So the way I want to tighten the reflection, let's see, I tab into edit mode, want to go to our shrink wrap modifier settings and enable the modifier for edit mode. I basically want to take this edge loop, and you can see how it's kind of smoothly interpolating over the transition from eyelid to eyeball. And so I need to diminish that and tighten it. Now, if I try to, let's see, turn off proportional editing and G twice to go into edge loop slide. Okay, so I actually think what the problem is, if we open our view properties, in edit mode, we see the vertex weight values, and we set these to be halfway in between the eyeball shrink vertex group and the eyelid shrink vertex group. So I want to give full influence over to the eyeball shrink group. Okay, that hopefully will just pull it a little bit tighter that direction. So with those selected, I'm not selecting these two towards the caruncle because I think, that makes more sense to be smooth like this. But for the eyeball, I'm going to take the weight up to 1 on these verts and assign. All right, and we see that snap much sharper. And we get rid of the intersection, which is great. But I think I need to move them up because they're snapping to the eyeball, but they're too far away from the eyelid. So if I just move these up, maybe together even. Okay, basically until we start to see issues with intersection. Oh, there's a little bit. Oh, no, there isn't. Perfect. Okay, yeah, I think this is the way to go. It's a little tedious, but, this type of tweak is really going to pay off. Okay, and then just to do the same thing to the other side, double check that there's no intersections. All right, that's looking good. All right, so I'll do the same thing. Select this edge loop, deselect the caruncle, and in our vertex eyeball, we'll set the weight up to 1 and assign. That already makes a big difference. And then just make sure that I'm pulling it down closer to where the eyelid is. Okay, so that should tighten up the meniscus reflections. One more render test to confirm this. We'll go to, let's just go back to slot 7 and render. Ooh, yeah, that's looking good already. Nice and tight. Let's see, this is before with artifact and displaced reflections. There we go. Nice and tight in that transition. Let's see the other side. Whoops. Before and after. Yeah, that feels much better. And that's going to be the end of this video. I know it might seem like a small change when we go from this in the beginning to what we have now, but again, the eyes are so crucially important that it's worth taking the extra time to really perfect them. Trust me, it's going to pay off in the final result. But with that, I'm finally satisfied with the eyes, and we can move on to the eyebrows.